In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Graciously loving Father, we ask you to sustain our emotions, to enhance our mental health, and to strengthen, Lord, our physical well-being. May everything, Lord, be guided by you and provided by you. And at the same time, Lord, may we utilize them all for your greater glory. This we pray through Christ our Lord. Amen. So yun natin
Amen.
masal.
Pray
Pray
for
for
us.
Pray
us
for us.
With peace in our hearts forever.
forever.
Ever.
All right, sige. Good afternoon. Welcome back. It's been a while since we've seen each other. And I hope I was given the information second runner-up ang cast during the sports fest. Pero dako ko no ang diferensya. So sige lang. Sa dasal magpabawi na siya. Okay. So we're actually going to jump to some topics that is now going to deal on your end term, specifically under the family code. So this is where the meat of the matter about learning and medyo damo siya. So it can be an information overload, it can be overwhelming, but at the same time, it's going to be worth it. Why? Because the study under the family code is really right now conceptual. It's not going to be something that is article by article. We're going to jump from one article to the another article, which is going to address your concerns, your issues, or particularly answers to certain questions or problems that we will be dealing with. Okay, so part of the consideration is that um, be familiar with the different articles. I'm not gonna tell you read article 1 to article amo lang eh. I need you to be familiar with the chapters, the titles, even the provisions in itself that you think that they are very important. Nonetheless, it's very much again integrated because our study will be conceptual, not by article. So the challenge for you is to be curious. To be curious in the sense that what would be the proper manner of addressing certain issues and topics under the end term coverage. So allow me to share to you what are the essential things that I would be requiring you to be very much familiar with our end term topic. Okay, so here you have it. Okay, just a little here. Okay. Now, my concern is that we will be able to cover most of this. These are the general topics that you are obliged to know by heart. Say, for instance, the definition of marriage. In knowing and understanding what marriage is, you need to know your fundamental and basic principle about marriage, and that is how to define them. And you do not define them by your own terms. You define them under the law because the definition is very much encompassing, meaning it gives you the idea of its elements, its nature, the very concept of it. So it's very important to know Article 1 of the said family code. Now, we will also deal with requisites. We had an instance before wherein we were able to touch the subject about requisites, such as the essential requisites and the formal requisites. Then we will be dealing with property relations governing marriages. Why is it important that we are jumping into this topic? Because among the definition of marriage is that it is not subject to any stipulation except those that will govern property relations of the respective couples. Now, it's important for you to know what are these property relations. If you do not know them by now, please have the curiosity to at least know and make the distinctions between them. Attorney, why is it very important? Because again, it's going to give you the limitations. I know some of you are already aware of the general property relations. First, we have absolute community. Then we have conjugal partnership. Yung iba mga conjugal property, mga mo na siya. Conjugal partnership of gains. Then we have complete separation of property. Then these items can be mixed and interchanged. Say for instance, there can be separate properties as to particular declared properties. And there can be declaration as to instances of absolute community over properties that are already identified by the couple. Now, um, be familiar that, again, only the property regime of the marriage can be interchanged. Only instance of which it will require, it will require the need for distinctions, the need for limitations. So again, be as much as possible familiar with them. Why? Because there will be a point in our discussion that you would be asked, what would be the more advantageous, what would be the disadvantageous part. So maybe something like that. Next, of course, we're going to deal with marriages that would be considered void and voidable. We've touched some of this. We've touched and identified among them instances where a marriage would be considered as void by reason that it is against public policy, by reason that they are declared as incestuous marriages, or marriages that would be considered as voidable by reason that there's some defect in the requisites that are being asked from or required from the parties involved. Then we would also see a different type of marriage relation, which is the legal separation. How would this be different from any other conjugal relationship? For the ordinary layman, I'd just like to reiterate, ang sa iban sa ila, they would not know the distinction between like legal separation and annulment. Much more that ordinary individuals are not even knowledgeable what is the difference between a void marriage and a voidable marriage. Okay? So allow yourself to know this because in particular, as I was sharing this to my previous class, there are so many individuals who will be asking about this because the reality on the ground is there are families, individuals who are probably trapped in a very hostile marriage. And they would want to know reasons how to get away with it or bail out. Other instances, of course, another essential coverage are the rights and obligations between husband and wife. If you would ask me, before you're trying to define marriages, you need to define what are the rights and obligations of a husband and wife. That should be the first in the priority. Parehos na ba lang sa iban sa inyo, okay lang o wala label? Okay lang o wala lang kamo, ano na kami, fun. Fun, and inspire. Okay, mga na, magkakadlaw din ang mga guilty ng mga individual. Okay. But ang instance na is that before being engaged into this thing called marriage and family life, you need to understand, are you going to be the husband in the relationship? Or are you going to play the wife in the relationship? What would be your corresponding rights? What would be your corresponding obligation? Okay, so you would see that this is the conceptual approach. You're gonna look at it spread out in the family code, but it doesn't mean that when it's as far as Article 128, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be the first to be considered. Okay. Now, other instance is the constitution of a family home. We're gonna touch that. When can you state that there's a family home or there's a construction of the family home? The other thing that is essential for us to cover is paternity and filiation. When we're talking about paternity and filiation, these are instances wherein when can you say that you and your status becomes what? A legitimate child, or you are someone who be considered as illegitimate child. Well, of course, the textbook definition or for the understanding of individuals is that if you are born outside of the marriage existing, then that would mean that you are an illegitimate child. Say, for instance, Juan fell in love with Maria. Before they got married, eventually, Juan was able to impregnate Maria, and Maria gave birth to Pedro. Pedro, being born outside of marriage, he would be considered as an illegitimate child. Now, what would be the remedy to elevate the status of an illegitimate child to a legitimate status? Now, there is a third class of paternity and filiation linking that to legitimated children. Meaning, even if you're illegitimate as defined under the textbook uh, definition, you can be considered legitimated if, for instance, Juan and Maria will eventually get married. So your understanding would be is that what are the conditions involved in order to elevate a status of an illegitimate child to a legitimate status? Um, Very important. Next, we will also touch issues with respect to support. Support in the sense, not just emotional support, not just the physical support, but more or less the finances. And it's actually linked within the obligations of husband and wife. But we will deal with this more or less when we're discussing in depth the various rights and obligations of the parties involved. All right. So these are the essential coverage that we need to have. And by this reason, I now throw to you a question that actually would make the study more interesting. And that is, I need you to think what would be some of the conventional or the what you call as the have become a normal problem that occurs within marriages that you think would be vital for you to know for the reason that you're already studying the subject matter. So an example of that, when I asked the previous class, the other section, what are your problems with respect to family relations? So one was raising the point na, attorney, I think it's very interesting if we would know how to address issues about divorce, annulment. Of course, these are the bulk of the study of the family code. You're studying something that will help you excuse yourself in the future, that will help you get away and kumbaga, eliminate that responsibility or liability. Or for the legitimate causes, maybe some of the curiosity side would speak about what are those instances that can protect those individuals who are trapped in a very, again, hostile, undesirable type of marriages. Okay? Sige. So I'm throwing back to you this question. What do you think are circumstances within society and in reality problems that we are confronted and you think maybe sa inyo? I remember I remember someone also trying to say niya, hindi niyo man pagambalon nga inyo nga personal problema. Hambalon niya lang, may friend ko bala attorney nga ang iya nga boyfriend outside is already 17 years old. Di gusto na nila magpakasal. So, hide yourself under the may kilala ka mo. Something like that. Sige, anything. Come on, I give back to you. I throw back to you situations or instances when you think that the study of family code will help you in your understanding about resolving issues. Because this is the very meat of the subject. How will it help individuals, particularly if you know someone na may problema about marriage and family life? How will you be able to know and provide the legal answers or remedies to it? Sige, anyone would like to share? Okay, go. Wala? Anyone? Ano lang this is just the informal discussion.
Attorney, ano to ganiliwat?
Ang pamangkot is, can you try to think of an instance wherein you think, aram lang may circumstance, balang
Ay, okay.
para makasabat, anong himuon? Amo na, kung sa,
Mm-mm.
sa ano ta pa.
So,
Sige, Hart.
attorney, my friend, may kilala ako. May kilala ako, attorney, ng illegitimate child sa, so in-ask ko sa kay naka-mention sa nga ng naka-undergo court trial plus attorney, and the decision was that ang father i-support siya hasta nga mag ano siya. So di na support siya attorney financially plus amo na. So amo na curious ko kung ano na siya ang basis na why. So siguro part mo na sa obligations na i-support niya nga children, nga bata, although hindi sila married sa mother. Pero part sa obligation niya nga EK because iya na bata.
So parang ang guwa sinabi, what does the law say in instances wherein how will you support illegitimate children?
Yes,
so in particular, di ba? There might come a point wherein you're so in love with someone that you were able to conceive children, and then later on you would realize hindi kami para sa isa't isa. So nagpaubaya na kamuhanay. So what would be the corresponding ano na siya, liabilities or kumbaga obligations.
Obligations.
All right, sige. Thank you for that. Ano pa? Instances that you think the study will help you, or the provisions of the family code will guide you?
Attorney?
Sige, go again.
Ay, nakauna. Shell? Una ka, Shell?
Yeah. Ladies first. Go, Gary.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. Thanks, Shell. My friend ko, attorney, na illegitimate child siya. And then, daw ka lately, kilala siya bala, attorney siya, dad. And then, ang iya dad may family naman. Then so do worry ang wife sang dad niya because ano ko no nang nakulbaan siya nga basi may mana or something nga makuha na ang child because in kilala. But then wala na siya sa birth certificate wala gid na include ang father. Like ginkilala lang gid siya like subong na dako na ang child. So what patabo.
All right. So the important part with that is we're gonna deal with instances on how do you prove your affiliation. Instances that imagine nyo sa napatay si Henry C. Senior, nagambal ka nga, ay, isa ako sa iyang mga illegitimate children. So imagine the scammers would come along and say, so what would be the protection under the law on those instances nga represent sila that they are the illegitimate child? Of course, you would see in some Philippine drama that it's the DNA test, it's the more or less the scientific approach to that. But the law would also guide you in instances wherein sino ang may right para mag-question kung ina siyang tao is really the natural child of this individual. Say for instance, pwede lang na bala nga wife, pwede na ayhan mga kabataan, pwede na bala ang lulo kag lula, pwede lang na bala ang tupad balay, pwede na bala the state in itself. So these are instances wherein when we deal with paternity and filiation, you will find the answer on those instances, and then you will link that to the law on succession nga once na-establish mo na kung ano ang status niya, then you will eventually know, as I was mentioning a while ago or previously, that the share of an illegitimate child is only one half of that would be received by a legitimate child. So it may be unfair, but for different instances, there is this question: when can you claim that one is an illegitimate child? There are instances sa so kumbaga kung teleserye pa ni siya nga drama, first family sila. They are considered nga kumbaga at the time nga inugpakasal sila, napatay ang ilang nanay. Then the father was eventually able to marry or marry another woman. And then in the second family, there happens to be like three sets of children. Hindi, set of children. Five children. So what would be who has preferential rights or preferential status over the share of the mana? So those are some things that actually would clear your mind. You know, okay, it's not just about proving if you are the how do you prove? Who can contest? And if you have established that, how much is the extent of the ano na siya, share that one would get out of the so sige, that's a very touch point interesting subject for us. All right. Josh, thank you, Barry. Josh, what about your question? And then we'll go to Archan.
My attorney is about properties that
Mm,
like couples get when they're married, because this is kind of personal for me, attorney, because my childhood home back in Mindanao, I
mm,
lived there for about like around 14 years or 15, and then it's now being instruction attorney na i-foreclose because the one who owned the lot, attorney, was my aunt, and she got it through my grandfather, and my grandfather gave it to her because she married a Filipino Chinese man. And then I don't know how it works, but the Filipino Chinese man that she married was in debt.
mm,
Then gintaya nila ang lot ng childhood home ko. So subong attorney ginthreaten ng bank na i-foreclose ang lot. So that is why medyo na curious ko sa how it works para ma-try ko i-recover ang lot
okay.
as much as
So
possible.
it's a good thing because in your particular circumstance, there can be an interplay not only about property law, but about family law and the family code. Say for instance, because you mentioned that it was donated by reason nga nagpakasal ang aunt mo to this Chinaman, then it would fall under the chapter about donation propter nuptias or donations made by reason of being married to. So there can be an intricate provision that may interplay out of that situation. Now, there can be instances wherein linked to that, how does ownership, property regime, so makadto ka naman na sa mga property regime, what would be the nature? Would you consider that as a uh, anong ga-govern nga relationship sa property regime between the husband and the wife? And that because my debt nga na-incur ang husband, does that amount to what? The property also of the husband who is indebted to somebody. So in hindsight, you will be able to find out all of the answers to that when we're going to the chapter on topic with respect to property regimes and a little bit of property law. All right? Thank you. Sige, Archel, yes, how about you?
So good evening, attorney. I mean, legit na sa question.
Hmm.
Uh, doon nag-ano na sa it, doon nag-appear sa ako while I was showering. So, shower thoughts. And I am most curious man, attorney, because may tita ko nga ano nga naanal like I don't know last year or last few years na ano siyang husband and may bata sila, essentially so cousin ko lang. So I just knew nga nag-remarry sa nag-remarry sa abroad. So is it possible for her to remarry again? So muna sa gusto ko tayo mabalaan.
Nag-anal na siya and then nag-remarry siya. And then
Yes.
nag-remarry naman siya.
Nag-remarry sa but sa abroad, sa lain syempre nga person.
And then pagpuli niya,
So essentially
nag-remarry
na-annul
siya.
siya sa dali domestically with
Okay. So,
her
dalawa
husband.
lang ka marriages, bali ang natabo. One is the first instance, then yung paanal, and then the second marriage, niya subong.
Oh, so muna sa attorney if valid sa kay why mo divorce, 'di ba, sa Philippines.
Pero paano siya na-anal,
So,
di ba?
ambot yun yung attorney basta naana lang sa uno.
Sige lang, of course, you need to understand siguro whether there is a legitimate procedure for acquiring the decree of annulment. Okay.
Pero I have read the court ruling, attorney. Okay, for some reason,
So may court ruling.
nanglungkat ko sa kabinet. Yeah, so nakita ko and I read it.
Hindi man, kay do ang guwa sinada, if it went through the proper procedures and gained favor for her, nga naanal na, then technically you are restored to the status of being single. So you would now require legal capacity. Later on, when we're gonna discuss instances of the essential requisites, when we're gonna talk about legal capacity, as one of the essential requisites, you would then deal with number one. For us, how do we understand legal capacity? It is the legitimate or authorized status of one to be capacitated to enter into marry or to enter into a contract of marriage. So, number one, it should be on the basis, is it on the basis of age? Oh, check, pwede. Is it on the basis of whether that individual is vested by law or authorized by law to remarry or get married? Muna siya, instances na, kung nakapaanal na siya, there can be legal capacity for that individual to marry. Kung wala pa siya kapaanal, then there can be an impediment, or there is what we call the legal impediment or the prohibition to get married again. So legal capacity will not only speak of age, but it can speak as to the status. There are instances wherein foreigners would come here in the Philippines and then they would contract marriage. Our courts would require that they execute and provide proof that they are legally capacitated to enter into marriage. So parts sinada sa inang mga consideration. We're gonna deal with that. We're gonna look into that because namin na siya because arab lang pareho sinayo kung may plano ka mo nga magpakasal, kung ang pakaslan nyo, gawa pang hindi, ito yun ang iba niya, hindi gusto magpakasal. Hindi. O, kung wala ka mo planong pakasal, wala problema. Hindi man na para sa tanan. Muna gani, that's why ang isa sa mga ginasunlog sa mga professors naman sa una is that in studying the family code, you will eventually gain your conviction whether marriage is for you or not for you. May mga instances sinada. So sige lang, kahit it sounds cheesy, but for the right person, it will be all worth it. Yeah. Pero kung depende na siya kung
Attorney, amen.
so depende na. Ano Jancel, do hindi ka gid magpasugot how?
Sir, nag-agree ko, attorney.
All right. Sige. So, that's a legitimate question. So that can be answered. Anong nasusulat sa family code? We will be able to look into that. Sige. Other instances that piques your interest that you think could help you answer certain questions about ng understanding family law. Meron pa? Wala na? Say for instance,
Attorney,
yes, sige, go ahead.
hello, good afternoon.
Yes, yes.
So may kilala ako na attorney ako. So hindi ko galing attorney sure if di ini siya ka-fall good if family law or property law, but amo niya siya so may isa mother na nagbakal siya bisang duta from another person, then waaya na patituluhan only deed of sale, then sang na deads ang mother, ang iban nga mga parte napanghatag na sa mga brother and sisters napanghatag na sa mga anak yung iban nga parte. Then there is this one house, for example, attorney, ara siya napanghatag tuli attorney ang mga parte pero ay siya sang last will. Then there comes this house nga ginhambal yaman nga ihatag ni sa isaya ka certain nga anak, pero ay man siya sang last will again. Then amo na siya so ipatitudlohan niya na for example, so what does the law say about amo na if ay titulo, so ipagwa pa na ang do ka main title, then i-change sa name sang present owner, and nga need pa deed of heirship if in the first place do kang mga utod sang ina nga anak wa ay sang imbaligya nilang mga property wa ay naman sila need do ka amo na siya.
Sige. More of the subject din man na siya sa property law. But I find it that you also need to resolve what kind of property relation is established by the mother. Say for instance, if the mother who acquired the property is married, when sila napakasal, may interest ang husband, does the husband have interest over it? Or the issue would be, can it be subdivided right away without due recourse of waiting nga madedo ang iyang husband kaging pang subdivide na? Well, actually ang issue sina they more on land title din na siya, quieting of title, by the reason that wala na transfer ang title, wala na papangalan sa iya, pero na subdivide na, so there's an issue on partition, and there can be requirements to that under the law for registration. Kaya butang ta, there's just this mother title still in the name of the person naging baklan sang nanay. Now, ang ina nga title would be the basis, that mother title would eventually have to be transferred first to the name of the mother, and then after sa name sa mother is partitioned to the respective children. Meaning to say, kung bilog na siyang titulo nga mother title, ipang breakdown mo na ang ina nga mother title so that it would be named to particular children who has already partitioned the land. So may ara sinada for ano ni siya, this is more on the technical side sang land titles and deeds. But if your question is nga kinanglan pa mag-declare sang heirship, number one, it's because wala man niya kag wala man niya idea ang register of deeds who are the individuals that are entitled to inherit from the mother. So base ang iban yung pang subdivide lang na nila, and then what could be the proof of ownership. Okay, this is more an issue on ownership and acquisition of land by virtue of their deceased mother. Okay lang. Sige lang. But at least we can still relate that to family code by reason of how it was being acquired and what reason and what capacity are they subdividing the property. All right. Sige. Thank you, Fred. Any other questions?
Thank you, attorney.
On the peak of family law. Sige, go. Josh.
Attorney, another question, attorney. I have a friend, attorney, who has parents na annulled, attorney, and he told me that their ground of separation was the lack of support coming from his dad. But I don't know to what extent does the lack of support, to what extent or how does the law define the lack of support basically kay ang iya dad man gamit man siya with his dad man attorney within within once a week, pero I don't know if pwede na siya grounds for annulment. I don't know if the separation between his mom and his dad, his dad are basically annulled lang in his own terms. Uh, Basically, my question is like, what is it, the definition for support attorney?
All right, kay if we're gonna jump to the issue on support, that is not a valid ground for kumbaga um, declaration of nullity of marriage lang. There might be underlying reasons surrounding it, because if you would ask me particularly, though medyo hilaw pa ang ina nga issue to be considered as the main reason why the court would decide that the marriage is severed na. It might be nga diba si wala na sila yag of the nice ang nanay, or it can spring from the psychological incapacity to perform the marital obligation. So that can be one of those underlying reasons, and particularly abandonment. O, basi ang tatay wala na yaga pakita sila balay. And kung wala na siya pakita sila balay, wala na siya gahatag support. So that can be correlated. But on the issue of purely wala support, say for instance, they live on the same house, ang tatay wala gahatag sa bata, tapos wala gahatag sa iyang wife, the wife cannot just invoke, okay, bulagay na tayo, way mo ko ginatagaan pang shopping. So that's not entirely a constitutive reason or ground. But nonetheless, this will allow you to look into what are the grounds for annulment. So what are the grounds to declare? So di ba lang, we were looking already on the instance of void marriages and voidable marriages. So at this point, part of your research or your feeding your curiosity is that you need to understand what's the difference between a void marriage and a marriage that is voidable. Okay? So the instances would be when you're trying to ask to declare your marriage as void, your procedure or your petition to the court is to declare it as a nullity, decree of nullity. Whereas if you are going to ask the court to have it annulled by reason that it is voidable, then that would be annulment. Okay? So that the technical term, as those who are studying the law would know the distinction. Kay very particular ginayang court kung magambal ka nga what is your petition? My petition is for the declaration of nullity, but you're presenting facts that falls under voidable marriages. Then do mahambal ang court, you do not know your law, because again, if there is a criteria for you to follow when it falls under voidable marriages, and there is a criteria for you to observe if it is void marriages. Right? Sige. I'll accept two more questions or something that part of the discussion when we're gonna discuss family law. Any more? Kasi may gusto pa.
Attorney, last na lang sa
Oh,
kon.
sige.
I have another question. This is personal man attorney because natawa siya sa relative ko. So ang cousin, ang tito ko na may siya kid. Then hindi sila married sang girl. Then ang girl na gibilin niya ang kid sa iya. Then gulpe lang bala nadula attorney. And now daw gakakulbaan sila kay basi kwaon naman sang mother ang child. Pero ang child is 8 na. I think this year daw may 8 na siya. So what will happen attorney to the child if ikwaon siya sang mother?
So they're not married, di ba?
No, attorney. Pero the last ang child, ang family name sang tito ko.
Okay. So the one that can guide you to understanding that is you need to understand paternity and filiation. What would be the status of illegitimate children and who exercises parental authority? So the issue on filiation and the law on parental authority will be the one that will resolve this conflict or resolve the problem. Now, parts in a day, if you would be able to look into the law on illegitimate children, the one that primarily exercises parental authority is the mother, despite the fact that the child is carrying the family name of the father. Why? Because under our jurisdiction, it does not take away the status of illegitimacy even if the child carries with the consent of the father ang pagdala ng family name. That's not going to be the excuse on the issue about illegitimacy. So if you would look at it, I'm sure some of you have already the idea that children below 8 years of age, their if by instance it shall belong, their custody shall belong to the mother. Pero something that, again, that you can easily resolve is that look into the status of the child. So if the child is an illegitimate child, the presumption under the law is that parental authority must be vested to the mother first. Now, ang next na question sinada, can that be overturned? Then you will have to institute a proceeding in court in order to declare that the mother is either unfit to carry out the what you call as the obligation of trying to say for instance be able to provide for the child and medyo medyo madugo-dugo medyo tayo issue. But in this instance, ang particular nga resolve sinada is that kung kwaon sang nanay, then he would have little or no right to have access, not access, custody to the child. But the father can have access to in trying to exercise parental authority. All right?
Thank you, attorney.
Thank you. Okay na ta? Basi may banda gusto nga mag ano kay hindi karon katulog kay kabalugi ko nga muna tapat ang yung pamangkot ko tani. Sige, anyone? Wala na? Sige.
Si Richelyn, attorney.
Oh, sige, go. Richelyn, basi may hara ka nga gusto ipa ano? Go Hindi mo iyak. Libre konsulta.
Sa ano lang attorney no, curious lang ko sa Muslim nga damo sila gali pwede maasawa. Sa ano man na siya attorney like wala man na siya ga ano sa aton like bawal man mga bit like inana or na fall man na siya sa dra na category or ano na curious lang ko.
Actually, that's one of those instances bilang very unique in our setting. Our country does not recognize polygamous marriages, but it's subject to Muslim personal laws under the Sharia law, wherein they are allowed. I have not fully dealt with the Sharia law, but there are instances wherein the customary practices has ripened into the vested right for them to acquire marriages more than once. So, ang problem ng sinada is, there was this instance ng problem. Isa, say for instance, one was married to Maria already. And then after drifting apart for several years, without trying to dissolve their marriage, one was able to find a new lover named Nancy. She married Nancy. Pagka-marry niya kay Nancy, technically, he is already liable for a bigamous marriage. And that is not just a civil case, but a criminal case. Now, he would then invoke an issue about this particular case. Sambalo niya, nga Muslim siya and he's allowed to remarry. Now, first, gina din nga dason nga question sinada. Is there a prejudicial question? Balik ta sa inyo nga na to, Nana. Is there a prejudicial question? Meaning to say, si Juan, gingkasuhan siya ni Maria sa korte, kagahambal sa korte nga iprisuhan yun ni si Juan kay ang iya nga ikaduha nga kasal is considered as bigamous marriage. Therefore, liable siya to be imprisoned. Now, will it prosper, or will this involve the case of a prejudicial question? So of course, your identification here is that you need to understand what is a prejudicial question. Again, in a prejudicial question, it would come into reverse that usually in the normal set of things, criminal cases are resolved first before civil proceedings. So in a normal setting, civil cases are held in abeyance. Except, anong exception sinada? One, if there is an independent civil action. Kung independent civil action, ang criminal case can proceed and the civil case can also proceed. Okay? When can there be? May layer naman na siya. So, amo tong question, criminal case. So, sa criminal case, dapat mauna. Exception sinada is independent civil action. So, independent civil action, may aral na siya categorization. One, is it allowed and directed by law to be filed and proceed together with the criminal case? If it does, then it will proceed. Next issue is that did he or she reserve his right to prosecute the civil aspect of it? If he did not, then, well, there is an instance wherein the civil case has to wait. The next issue naman behind that is that, is it a prejudicial question? Meaning to say, unahon ta na resolve ang civil case. Kay base, kung ma-resolve ta niyang civil case, hindi na ni mag-take effect kag wala na violation under the law. So this is the particular example of Juan, Maria, and Nancy. One is claiming that he is a Muslim, and being a Muslim, he is allowed to marry as multiple times as he can and allowed under his what? Religious belief. Now, if for this instance, indeed that he is practicing under Muslim law, then he can be absolved for that. But the question is, in all honesty, you can only claim that if, number one, you have practiced the ceremony under specifically the rites and rituals of Sharia law. So kung nagpakasal siya sa civil law, then there can be an issue na it's not allowed. Kaya there is an explicit understanding that it must be under the rites and rituals. So that can be an issue. Now, assuming that it was under the rights, then you can always claim na okay, he can be absolved for it by the reason that it's allowed under Sharia law. Okay? So, pero ano naman ang distinction sinada? He should have been a Muslim from the very start. Why? Kaya iban sinada mapa-excuse na mo. Pareho sina Katoliko ko be, subong nagpakasal ko. Nagpakasal mo ko dayon sa dason ko nga kasal. Hala, sang time naging kasal ko, hindi pa ko tuya gali ya Muslim. Mapa-convert ko anay Muslim para maanad ko. That can be what we call an overbearing of the circumvention sa prohibition for bigamous marriage. Okay? Sige. So kung damo ka, kung okay lang si mo nga may kahati ka, Richard, sa imong pagpalangga, o di ba? The more the merrier. Why kita problema? Ara na ya sa consenting adult. Pero kung hindi kaya, syempre, there are certain limitations. Alright, sige. Medyo interesting ang inyong mga points. I have that. Alright. Some curious nga mga instances. Say for instance, this can be resolved. What is the property regime between someone who does not have the benefit of a marriage? They've lived inside, or they live together, and inside the community, they have represented themselves as husband and wife for more than 20 years. But eventually, it was later found out that they were not married. What would be the property regime for this? There is a provision in law for that that anticipated it. Okay. There can be instances also that would require uh, for the particular case, ang natunanta na sa previous nga term, sa midterm, instances that you are going to remarry abroad. Instances about remarrying by reason that you have acquired already a divorce decree. So ang iban nga mga Pinoy, kung mag-silo sa lain nga country, ma-acquire sila din divorce. Pagka-acquire nila divorce, pakasal sila dayon. I think it's very clear right now that the answer to that is that it will depend on what? What is the dependency? The citizenship of that individual. Because again, family laws relating to the status, condition of an individual is governed by his national law, even if they are living abroad. So at least that would clarify. Tahi na siya when we're gonna deal with the family code. All right. Sige. So that's that. Now, I'm trying to provide to you certain facts about the introduction to your family law or your family code. Are you aware that the family code is not a what? It is not a piece of legislation made by the legislative, but it is under the executive prerogative with the exercise of a legislative power by the president because it is an executive order. Okay? It was then an executive order. So, wait I'm just trying to okay, so let me share to you this. Prejudicial question. I forgot I was supposed to discuss to you ang yung exam. But admittedly, I have not finished checking everybody's exam. We will go back to this so that it will fortify your knowledge with respect to your study. We did not touch on citizenship because that is already dealt with by your political law. I leave it to the issue on your political law with respect to that subject. Beginning page. 400 aspects. Here. So when we're dealing with the family code, please note that the Executive Order 209 and was amended by Executive Order 227 under July 17, 1987. But in particular, your basis for its effectivity is the period under July 6, 1987. Why is it important to know the distinction on the effectivity of the family code? Because there are instances wherein you would know what would be the property regime or the relationship of the husband and wife when they got married. Say for instance, kamo, pakasal na kamo subong. Of course, the law that shall prevail would be the family code. But those marriages before 1987, before the effectivity of the family code, the property regime, the law that governs the marriage would be mostly under the civil code, particularly those that are found under Title 3 of Book 1 of the Civil Code. But this has already been repealed. Okay? Now, in this instance, why is it very significant? Because kung nagpakasal ka mo, wala niyo yaging discuss kung anong inyong property relation. There is such a thing as an a default property regime. Meaning to say, kung wala ka mo yan nag-prenup agreement, ano mga prenup agreement nga mabatian nyo? Usually, sabihin nyo na mabatian mga prenup agreement sa mga mga noon natin niya ang may mga milyones bala. Kung magpakasal ka sa akon, ang akon nga property will remain as my property. And even if I die, you will not get any cent. Okay. So that would be like a declaration that it is a complete separation of property. Now, the next issue or question about that is, why is it very material to know the effectivity date? Sang wala pa nag-effect ang family code, there is a difference on what kind of property regime that is the default property regime. And that is what? Before the effectivity of the family code, ang property regime was conjugal partnership. And then after the effectivity of the family code, what we have is the absolute community. Why? Kay pasmaras hapos. Kay ti arihan, pakasal ka, wala ka kabalo kung anong himuon nyo, kung anong inyong financial relation, kag inyong economic relation, ari inyo ay. Tanan nga iya, imo man. Tanan nga iya, imo. Tanan nga imo, iya. Oh. Wala ka na may mahimo. So that would be very much essential for you to identify there's a cut-off period. All right. When we're talking about marriage, please take note the definition of marriage already. Okay? Definition of marriage is very essential. Mind you, as I'm already announcing it here, when we're going to have our quizzes with respect to marriages, you will have to note down the definition of marriage under Article 1. Okay? Attorney, memorize on gid namon. Yes. Why? Because, believe it or not, magtulog ka, you will be able to identify the essential points of the family life by just simply trying to define what is a marriage. Okay? So, part of what you need to learn from this is that you would also need to understand how to distinguish marriage from ordinary contract. My difference? Yes, there's a big difference. Although marriage is a contract, it is a special contract. One that is imbued with public interest. Ara from the definition gina mismo sang marriage. What is a marriage? Marriage is a special contract. Stop. So what is that special contract? It is a permanent union. What do you mean by that permanent union? Bonded together for life. Between who? Between a man and a woman. On how they are going to bond there for the permanent union. It must be in accordance with law. So what would be in accordance with law? Those that you would require the essential requisite and the formal requisite in order to have a marriage valid. So what is the purpose of entering into a marriage? It is for the purpose of establishing conjugal and family life. What is marriage? Marriage is the foundation of the family. Yeah. And it's an inviolable social institution. whose consequence, nature, and incidents are governed by law. So please be able to memorize this by the simple reason that it's going to expand your understanding and the application of the family code. Now, is what it as being stated, you need to understand the distinction of marriage. Marriage is not just a mere contract, it is a social institution. What do you mean, attorney, by social institution? It is one that is protected by the state. If you would have your contract, an ordinary contract, while it may be protected by the state is not as proactive as that one which involved marriages. Next distinction is that in an ordinary contract, you can fix the stipulations. The parties can be able to fix the stipulation. Such as, say, for instance, I am selling my land. If I'm going to sell my land, I would be the vendor. And as the vendor, I'm going to sell to you 250 square meters of my land found in Bacolod City. So you can claim this, you can own this land by paying me 250,000. 250 million. O, butang ta 1 million per square meter. Mahal ba? Oo. So in marriage, say for instance, you cannot fix any of the stipulations except that is provided by law. Anong instances sila? Say for instance, ang hambal ng husband, sa aton nga marriage contract ha, makontratahay na tadaan, mag-abot gani ang November kag December, pwede ko ya kapangita ibang nga babae ha. Ikaw ya kung January kag February, pwede kaya kapang lalaki. Basta mo na yung klaro sa akon. Oh. Pasugot man ng babae. Oh. Next. Mahambal naman ng lalaki nga, aton nga kondisyonin sinabi, pwede ko sa lalaki, pwede mo ako sa babae. Ha? Oo. Pwede ko pa-estar ang akon nga kabit sa aton nga balay. Yung babaeng pasugot man. Pati upod sa pamilya sang akon nga kabit. Pati pasugot man ang babae. These are not valid stipulations that can be allowed by law. Unlike in ordinary contracts, the party has autonomy to state, say for instance, the 250 square meter lot that I'm selling to you, I am going to agree to sell it to you provided that there is a condition that you will only build a house there. You cannot build any other structure, only a house. And then the other party would agree. Then that is the freedom to stipulate what kind of conditions you have in an ordinary contract. But in marriage, you cannot make your own stipulations because the obligations are already being established to you by law. All right? But there is an exception. The exception is what I told you already. The exception is with respect to marriage settlement or the economic provisions. Before you get married, you can enter into a prenuptial agreement claiming that, okay, we will get married, but the property relation we will have is a mixture of separate property, complete separate property, and conjugal partnership of gains. So pwede na siya? Yes, pwede na siya. Basta it involves economic provisions, pwede. There is even a provision that I was able to encounter wherein gahambal yang husband niya nga, if my wife will cheat on me, she will not acquire anything from my estate. Pwede. Because that involves, number one, an instance of the economic relationship. Another instance of that is, another question is, for every year that my wife is with me and has loved me faithfully, she is entitled to 1 million. Galing ito ang problema sina, kung napatay ang husband nga, wala magali kwarta, thank you mangyapon. So, at least gimbutang mo, at least naging loyal ang mga wife kay nag-expect siya gali kay mas pigado pagali kaysa sa daga ang mga husband. So nabudol siya, nabudol. Pero that's still a valid provision because it's going to provide economic mga provisions. Next is that in an ordinary contract, you can mutually agree that you will no longer proceed with the contract. That earlier example regarding the deed of sale of that 200 square meter lot, say for instance, the vendor would say, hindi ko na lang ipag-ibaligya. Tapos nagambal ang buyer nga, oh, hindi ko na lang napag-backloan kay do hindi ko kaya ang mga kondisyones ng imbutang mo. Nga dapat balay lang yun ang patindog ko na da. Gusto ko yung ipatindog ko na da, 10 story nga building, grabe no. Kung may kipot-kipot. You know how small the 250 square meters and then 10 story, it's just like one stack of na siya. Ang yung ginagabot-gabot na stacked. Basta anyway. So that's how difficult it is. In an ordinary contract, any of the parties will be able to agree mutually on how they will be able to eliminate or cancel and end the contract. Here, in marriage, you can only dissolve it by death or through proper court judicial procedure. So, munang till death do us part. Wala na na-include nga, pwede nyo na ipaanal. And marriage is a special contract by reason that there can only be two parties involved. And the parties can be only man and a woman. Ordinary contract, yeah, you can have as many as you want. As many buyers, as many sellers, as many parties that can be involved. So these are just an introduction of what we're going to look at. Because again, we're going to distinguish marriage from ordinary contracts. Mas taas ang pag-appreciate, mas taas ang pag-evaluate when it comes to what? The application of marriage. Okay? So, if we are going to jump into the provision naman niya, as I told you, we're not gonna do this by article. We're gonna do it conceptually. What do you mean by that? You need to go through first, muna ang ibansin nyo, magpakasal. Hindi kabalo na kung magpakasal ka mo, ano ang inyong mga rights and obligations as husband and wife. Let me get that page for you. Sige. While I'm trying to get that page, are there any questions? So, Parkins, hindi pa mga mo?
May question ko, attorney.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, if this seems like a joke, pero legit sa question. So, what if for example, husband and wife, for example, let's say a husband or wife, or for the sake of example, na lang husband na lang. So, like, na critical sa, and then, he died for like a second, then was revived. So is it still till death do us part, or is it a ground for I mean legit is it a ground for an if ever it happens?
What do you think? What do you think? Sige ba?
I don't know, attorney.
No, this is an honest
I think attorney.
Why would you say so?
I mean, kaya napatay man sa for like a second or something.
So as death do us part, then once they die, marriage is actually being dissolved. Well, there can be more than several instances wherein marriage would consider it as kasayang. I remember a certain novel wherein They got married right away, and then the husband had to leave to be with the war, to be in war. And they never really got to stay together as husband and wife, but they only made correspondence through letters. And then eventually, the husband was declared missing in action. The wife remarried. And then later on, nagpakita liwat ang husband. Nakasurvive siya gali because the husband became a prisoner of war. So what happens to him? What happens to their love story? Abangan ng susunod na kabanata. So the issue that I want to share to you is this one. Let's start with marriage. Marriage first under the rights and obligations between husband and wife. So the husband and wife, there is a requirement. So kamo, kung magpakasal kamo, intindihon nyo nga there is a requirement to have a personal obligation. There is a duty to live together. There is a duty to observe mutual love, respect, and fidelity. There's a duty to render mutual help and support. So certain instances, these can be invoked together with some other reasons that will be considered as what? A violation of the duty and the obligation of one party to the other. Ang namin, sinundig nga pamangkot, the duty to live together. If you are going to look at your case digest under Chiming Choi, impliedly stated here under the duty to live together is to also procreate, or the consortium, cohabitation, and sexual intercourse. Pero attorney, what if they are just living together? I mean, hindi na nila kaya because, there can be like eternal love, such as old couples. Kitanay sila sang 75 years old na siya. And then ang babae, 75 years old na. Siya ang iyang totga. Yan, totga. Anong totga? The one that got away, attorney. So nagpakasal sila, 75 years old. Hindi na sila ka-procreate. Can that person file annulment by the reason that they can no longer have sexual intercourse, invoking Chiming Choi doctrine? Anong sabat niya? Funny as it may sound, it cannot be invoked by the reason that they are already fully aware of the limitations of their physical capacity. Others, they enter into a marriage by various reasons. I will marry you because it is set up by my parents. Is that a void marriage or a valid marriage? This is an arranged marriage. Valid? Hindi.
Valid, attorney, I think.
Nga valid.
As long as my marriage contract sa attorney, valid sa attorney.
Yes, and it
but
was
it can be
consummated.
voidable based on this Article 68.
By the sheer reason, ang pag-provide nyo is that when you're looking into these personal obligations, will they be able to render the mutual love, respect, and fidelity? Because these are obligations imposed to them by law. But the answer to this would resolve not in this nature, but you look at the essential requisites. You go back to your essential requisites. In Article 2, if it's going to state there that they have complied with the essential and formal requisites, who are we to look into the motivations that they had in trying to get married? Diba? Say for instance, if we're gonna look into Article 2, Ano siya? What page ganing Article 2? Ay, ano siya? What page is Article 2? Requisites for a valid marriage. 200. Sorry. $245. Sorry. It's 245. What are the requisites? We're gonna jump from the previous article. What are the essential requisites? Duwa lang
Legal
na
capacity, sir.
legal capacity
And
and
consent freely given.
consent to be freely given.
So, ma-fall na siya sa consent freely given. So, sir, ang for ano ba ng ang marriage, sir, arranged marriage o
it can be because number one, if the marriage is being considered as what you call this, ano siya gani, ng arranged, and if the child is being forced to, then consent may be vitiated. What happens if consent is vitiated? Vitiated means there might be a violation or alteration to that. What would that entail?
well, the marriage will still be valid, sir, but voidable.
Yes. In instances wherein consent is vitiated, marriage will still be valid. However, it may be subjected to be annulled by invoking that one did not possess the necessary consent. Sige lang, I'll try to here. How many things that you'd have to be considered because it's a long read. When you're gonna deal with the requisites like legal capacity, there is a discussion in another article for this. And when you're gonna look at consent freely given, there's also a requirement for this explained in another article. Say for instance, if we're gonna look into legal capacity, you would definitely need to look into Article 11. I'm sorry, not 11. Previously married case. Ano siya ginamin ko sa Article 15, no? If you're by the age of 21 and 25, you need to ask for parental advice. This is a requirement, parental advice lang. But if you are 18 years old and not yet over 21, anong kinanglan mo? Parental consent. So that forms part of the consent to be freely given. All right. So there's a lot of reading materials here that we will go through more, we will go through this more in concept and for you to answer. Just like when you had your recitation, I'll give the questions ahead so that you can try to research and study. Okay, sige. Yes, question? Yes, Mr. Mark?
Sir, good evening, sir. Mamakot lang ka ni sir, if ano ba sir, kaya ma-end ang contract sa marriage if mapatay ang isa, di ba sir? Di paano ba sir, if half dead ka ba sir, like na ano ka sir, na put ka into a reversible kung mataw sir, so maano na sir ang marriage sir? Kaya half dead ka lang sir.
So
ano na matabo sa contract sir?
effect, ang marriage would also be half valid. No, the identification of death must be complete in its sense. Therefore, so long as an individual is still considered to be alive, legally and by definition, not yet dead, the subsistence of the marriage will still continue. Okay? Grabe. Kung ang imo nga love of your life para nasa coma, mangita ka pa iban, ano na siya man? Yun yan. That depends sa tao. Pero ang
Thank you, sir.
legal answer for that is, of course, the marriage would still subsist. For all intents and purposes, the legality of the existence of the marriage would remain simply because one has not obtained the status as defined of what is considered to be deceased or dead husband. All right?
Thank you, sir.
I'll assign more tasks for you in particular sa inyong mga assignments. So take this time and week to pamalandong because it's a holy week. So enjoy your holy week. I will not give you your but the moment we resume, maybe I would require you to meet on a Thursday also or another date in particular. All right? Sige. Any other concerns, questions? Wala naman?
Attorney.
Again, go ahead, Vincent.
How about yung ang gapakasal, like here nagpakasal sila sa Philippines, then nagpakasal sa other country, then nagkataon nga mahiwalay sila. What will happen?
Hiwalay sila? Paano sila naghiwalay, Vincent? Ikwento mo. Ano, Vincent? Anong nangyari?
Like may kabit, then gusto na sang girl nga do i-end na ilang
Ilang life? Married life. Ang imong example is that same parties or different parties na sila? Explain your facts.
Same parties sila.
Di wala, kay pareho sila nagpakasal ka kay Julie. Tapos, diri sa Pilipinas, ka mo nagpakasal. Kadto ka mo doon sa Japan. Nagpakasal mo ka mo to. Tapos si Julie nagambal nga, hindi na ta Hindi na ko si mo Vincent, kaya wala mo ginakompleto ang imong mga questions kag pamangkot kay attorney. So, hindi na siya gusto. So, anong matabo sinada? Julie, do na affected kagad. Sorry ha. Okay lang na, hindi na si Vincent lang na, lang ni hypothetical. So baliliwat ang pamangkot ni Vincent is kung nagpakasal sila sa Pilipinas, tapos ano yun ito son Vincent?
Then nagpakasal po sa ibang country.
Lain naman nga tawang yung pakaslan niya?
Attorney.
Ha?
Same lang.
Ang Japon? So ano daw yun ang pamangkot? Kung nagpakasal sila din, nagpakasal mga sa abroad.
Then like maghiwalay sila, arang possible need pa to nila nga mapa-divorce pa sila sa
ibang country. Okay. So that's a valid question actually. Julie, anong answer mo kung sa ila? Mga pamangkot.
Depende, guro attorney, sa kung diin. Ang sa article, basta sa attorney, sa may if diin nga lugar sila, diin nga law valid attorney or national law nila nga both duwa sila. If sa Japan, ang law sa Japan be attorney, like pwede lang ka divorce.
Sige, okay lang. Di bala ang nadula sila duwa. May misteryo nga natabo, nga dugan gikan mo kadula, may paglilid lang at may pagnanasa sa
Official attorney.
Gabisyo. Amo gina basta mga
May prenup agreement, attorney.
May kamalamalahan. Hindi. The valid question is actually being raised by Vincent. Say for instance, a couple marries here in the Philippines and they get married abroad. And when they returned to the Philippines, nag ano sila Vincent, naghiwalay sila by which reason? Sa Philippine law?
Yes, attorney.
Are they also required to dissolve their marriage out abroad? Okay, ang pinaka-simple sinadang nga sabat sinada is that you will only use the decree of nullity or annulment. Pakita mo to sa dito nga court sa Japan. Kasi for instance, base yan, nagbalik ka to sa Japan, Vincent, tapos may gusto ka to pakaslan. So sa records ng Japan, wala sila kabalo nga diri sa Pilipinas siya na dissolve ng imong kasal. So what you're just simply going to do is that present the decision that favored the annulment. So hindi na yung automatic that the other country will be informed of what is our status here because that is a municipal law involving only the jurisdiction of our country, not to the other country. All right? Sige, pero thank you again. That's a very valid question. Yes, Mark.
Sir, wala ko na lower ako na answer. Sorry.
Okay. Sige lang. Pero amo na siya, there's a practical reason. Muna gani nga what piques your interest about family law is that sometimes it can involve someone you know. It can involve someone you think that you are aware of. Now, the next concern, Yunada, is that as we have always been informed, that marriage does not take place only between two parties. The reality is that if you're very spiritual, mambala sila, put God in the center of your marriage. So God will become the third party. So the third party is a higher being. Others naman they would claim that kung magpakasal ka, hindi mo lang yung asawa or ang babae or ang lalaki ang ginapakaslan mo, kundi bilog niya nga pamilya. There's a philosophical and social reality to that. But since we're studying family code and introduction to law, let me also give you the insight that when you get married, you are also inviting the state inside your marriage because the state will govern the relations between the husband and wife. And the state, through the granting of a marriage license, di ba? Kung ikaw ga-drive, di ba, pribilehiyo na siya nga ginahatag simo kung nakapasar ka sa tanan nga requirements. Kung na-check, naka-comply ka, then you will be granted a license to get married. But of course, that's the general rule. Later on, we will discover that there are instances that marriage can take place without a marriage license, but these are under exceptional circumstance. And in reality, sa Pilipinas, this has blatantly abused. Blatantly abused. Why? Because others would tailor fit and claim that they are people that belongs to the exception. Ngayon, hindi na kuno kinanglan marriage license. All right, with that, I think you still have a class pa for Ms. Ivelnio. What would be concern? If you have no other concerns, leave Jesus in our hearts.
Forever.
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 Okay, you can go. Hello.
Thank you, attorney.
Thank you, attorney.
Thank you, attorney.
Bless you.
Enjoy your Holy Week. Jabe, you can go. 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 Wala na, nagapamati ah.